I think maybe the clearest way to see the need in the context of the urgency to do something about climate is to consider that roughly half of transportation energy use is very difficult to provide from sources other than liquid fuels. And specifically, I'm speaking about aviation, I'm speaking about ocean shipping, I'm speaking about long-haul trucking. And in a world that has less and less reason to depend on scarcity to make us do climate-wise things, these things that are the hardest to make happen may not happen unless we're able to provide low-carbon liquid fuels. And by far the leading way to do that is from biomass, which is nature's form of the income of organic compounds. There's also a very important role I should mention. Bioenergy is broader than biofuels, as Glaucia mentioned. There's a very important role for bioenergy in providing electricity, especially electricity that is non-intermittent, because one needs backup. And there are different parts of the world that have different primary needs from bioenergy, and that came through very strongly in our exercise. Multiple benefits, I think you asked me to comment on. I believe, and the World Bank is very deeply involved and has originated many of these studies, but most of the world's poor are rural poor, and the greatest kind of development to benefit the rural poor is agricultural development as opposed to manufacturing development. And in Brazil and elsewhere, we've seen bioenergy play a key role in that. I would mention that although small bioenergy certainly has a place, I think big bioenergy also has a perhaps underestimated place in economic development. You asked me to talk about liabilities, and I'm probably near the end of my 2 minutes, but I would say that the interconnectedness that you referred to, the requirement for cross-sector in order to realize benefits, is simultaneously the greatest curse and the greatest challenge of bioenergy, because when you get it right, precisely you can generate all of those things, and if you get it wrong, you can muck a lot up. And so it's that same interconnectedness which is the two sides of the bioenergy coin. So I'd like to add a few points. One, picking up on something Brito said, is the basis of what you compare bioenergy to, and it's often compared to perfection, and it falls short. And if it's compared to shale oil, for example, and that's not picking a bogeyman, that is the marginal place that these liquid fuels are coming from, you get a rather different perspective. Point number two is that the complexity, the chewing gum and walking at the same time that was mentioned, it's not specific to bioenergy. In fact, it is characteristic and integral to the sustainability conundrum in general. And so bioenergy may be one of the first places we work this out. But I agree with you, Brito, we need to accept the challenge of doing it right rather than saying, well, since no one else is held accountable, why should bioenergy be? But this is not particular to bioenergy. One thing that hasn't quite been said yet, I don't think, is if you take a step back and think of the biggest energy supply challenges to reach a low-carbon world, I think there are two. One of them is the second half of the low-carbon electricity problem. And as some of you may be familiar, it's because the investment in the backup capacity for intermittent renewables becomes more and more economically problematic the greater the penetration is of renewables. But the second is the second half of the low-carbon electricity problem. There is that's the one, that's twice. The second half of the low-carbon transportation problem. And the reason the second half is so difficult is because something rather close to the first half we can approach with things like electric vehicles, but there is a part that we need renewable liquid fuels for. And then the last aspect has to do with bioenergy and development. I may be wrong, which I think is a big concern of where we are, but I may be wrong, but when I look at the involvement that the World Bank has had in the past in bioenergy and development, it has tended to be technologies that can be implemented on a small scale. And I think those have a great place, and I hope they move forward, and I think they have a bright future. But I'm also very sure that they're not the only thing out there. And it's a really subtle thing, because on the one hand you can say that small-scale technologies they're the only thing that would be appropriate to the developing world. They're the only thing they have capital for, etc. But it also can very easily become paternal in the sense that, well, the rest of the world benefits from these large-scale technologies. No, but not our happy developing countries. They can only benefit from something small. So a place that I think there's particularly rich area to think about and realize added benefits is how to bring technology. It goes back to the question that you asked about Madagascar, was it? Yeah, it's how to bring technologies, in fact, on a large scale that realize the economies of scale and don't sacrifice them, but still meet social benefits. I think there's a great opportunity for more thought there. Thank you.